I've already told that to President Erdogan. Far more than sanctions. I'll do far more than sanctions. Lindsey, and I'd feel differently. I think Lindsey would like to stay there for the next 200 years and maybe add a couple of 100,000 people every place. But I disagree with Lindsey on that.
President Trump there responding to criticism from Senator Lindsey Graham and other Republicans for pulling U.S. forces from Syria ahead of Turkey's military invasion. Let's bring in Sarah Sanders, former White House press secretary and a Fox News contributor. Sarah, good morning and welcome back to America's Newsroom. Nice to see you this morning.
Good morning, Sandra. Thanks for having me on.
You have seen the continued criticism that the president has faced from his own party in the wake of that decision. How is the president handling this?
Look, this is an incredibly difficult situation, and certainly one that I don't think we want any American president to have to be in. I've sat in the room when the president has had to sign letters to families and make contact with families after they've lost a child in combat. He said it earlier, and I've heard him say it before. There's nothing more difficult in any part of his job than that role that he has to play as commander-in-chief. And I think that the president is doing the right thing by looking at how we protect the American military. This is not an easy situation. You have Turkey, who is a NATO ally. You have the Kurds, who have been an ally in the fight against ISIS. Unfortunately, those two allies hate each other. And the president wants to be careful that we don't get stuck in the middle of another endless war. This is a sad tragedy of the Middle East. It's a never-ending tale of the conflict that exists there. We've been working hard to try to reduce that, but the president wants to be careful that we don't continue to put American soldiers in harm's way for an endless war. He has also been extremely clear that if Turkey releases ISIS terrorists, dangerous ISIS terrorists, there will be severe consequences. And I can assure you that the president will definitely follow through on that severe consequences for Turkey, and I don't think that's something they want to see happen. One of the greatest accomplishments that this president has had has been in his defeat and the work that they have done to defeat the ISIS caliphate. It's a major accomplishment for this president.
But for that very reason, Sarah, for that very reason, he is being criticized for what this means. In effect, bolstering ISIS. You've heard from various Republican senators, members of Congress, who have spoken out and said this increases the chances of an ISIS comeback and endangers the Kurds. So what is the president's messaging here? And what does he need to do now, considering that Senator Lindsey Graham and Van Hollen, they just introduced these sanctions. They said they're going to introduce them as soon as Congress returns. They're going to target the energy sector, the military. The president said he supports those. But what can the president do now as he continues to face this criticism?
Well, I think he's got to continue to do what he's done since day one of taking office, and that's be tough on ISIS, be tough on who our real enemies are, and not get lost in who that is. Because let's not forget, again, Turkey and the Kurds are both allies of the United States. ISIS is the enemy here. We should collectively come together and try to focus on ISIS. That's what the president has tried to do, and I think you'll continue to see him do that. That's why he supports the sanctions. That's why he wants to make sure we continue to put pressure and not allow ISIS terrorists to be released. And he said that he would go much further than sanctions and put even more severe consequences if that happens. I think, again, the president has a very, very difficult situation. There's no good answer here, and that's the problem that we face every single day in the Middle East. But I think that the president is looking at this through the lens of the commander-in-chief and the person responsible for having to call mothers and fathers who have lost their children in this terrible fight. The president doesn't want to continue to do that for an endless war and continue to make call after call, send letter after letter, because we have two allies that can't come together and decide to fight the real enemy, and that's ISIS.
All right. We will continue to watch a reaction to all of that. Meanwhile, you've got the House Freedom Caucus demanding that Adam Schiff calling for his immediate recusal from the impeachment probe. Sarah, you've got the president facing the situation, obviously, with Turkey and Syria. You've got the impeachment that he continues to face, a situation in Ukraine. The president's got a lot on his plate. And meanwhile, the latest Fox News polling showing this as far as where respondents stand on the president being impeached and removed from office. And it shows 51% say that that should happen. I want to get your response to that before I let you go.
Sure. If anybody can handle a lot of different things on their plate, it's certainly Donald Trump. He's proven that time and time again, whether it's focusing on trade, the defeat of ISIS, rebuilding our military. He's very capable of doing a number of things at one time. I think that impeachment is very bad for our country, but frankly, it's not been bad so far for Republican fundraising or candidate recruitment. And I think that those two things mean infinitely more than a poll a year out. I think that the Republicans are absolutely right to go after Adam Schiff. He has shown that he is clearly politically motivated and politically driven in this entire process. He's weaponizing impeachment, and I think it is disgraceful what Democrats are doing to this president, but I'm thankful that we have a president that's not going to sit back and take these hits lying down. He's going to fight back, and I think you've seen that so far from the response from the White House, and I think they're exactly right. The president, I think at the end of the day, will be fully vindicated on the fake Ukraine scandal, just like he was on the fake Russia scandal.
All right, Sarah Sanders, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you for being here.